Thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming to this talk. I know the other one was very interesting as well, serverless. I guess that's an interesting topic. So that talk is about Symfony Messenger, which is a new component in Symfony 4.1, which is going to be released at the end of the month. The Symfony 4.1 Beta 1 has been released at the beginning of the week, so you can already try it and give us some feedback. So that's a 45 long talk. I need to do that in 25 minutes, so I might be a bit quick. So what is Symfony Messenger? It's about queues, worker, and more. So the main thing is trying to answer a sort of problem that we didn't answer with Symfony before. Typically, when you actually want to use like message buses, or you want to do asynchronous processing of things, when it takes too much time, or when you've got like special workloads. So the idea is to put that within Symfony, so you can already use that as a component, or within your Symfony application. So first, I'm going to just introduce myself quickly. I'm Samuel. I work for Kamet Ventures, which is a startup studio. Obviously, we are here as everybody. I'm core team member of Symfony, API platform, and continuous pipe. If you don't know the second one, Symfony, that's unlucky. We're going to talk about that. API platform, if you don't know, you should check this out. That's an API platform, or an API framework built on top of Symfony. And continuous pipe is a continuous deployment pipeline, fully open source, for containerized application to Kubernetes clusters. So it might interest you as well. So what is Symfony Messenger about? So the first thing is about messages. So the idea is, in this component, everything is related to your messages. A message in your application is just a PHP class, just a standard PHP class. There is nothing special, it's just your own code. That kind of describes something. So in the talk, I'm going to use some examples. And the example I'm going to use especially is like, let's say you want to send some notifications. So you're going to create messages to some sort of like send commands to send notification to some people. The second concept in the Symfony Messenger is the message bus. So the idea is you have your own message and you dispatch it to a message bus. A quick question, who actually uses these kind of like buses in their application already? Okay. So it's not that many people yet. So the next concept is when you actually dispatch a message to your message bus, then you've got something that actually do something. And that something is called message handler. So that's basically your business logic. So if we use the example of sending a notification again, there's going to be something that might talk to an API to send a SMS or a push notification to something, or just an email or something like that. So that's the main three concepts. There's another one that is called transport. So the idea is that instead of directly calling your message handler within your application, which already has a lot of like very nice implications because you could you decouple your application very nicely. But on top of that, what we'd say is that we can actually route the messages not directly to the handlers, but to some transports. So basically what that means is that instead of calling directly the handler, they're gonna go via message queue, for example, so RabbitMq. They can also go through like other kind of like message broker. They could go through an API. That's just the abstract concept of a transport. And the last one, which is pretty interesting, that's the worker. So when we actually publish the messages in some message queue, we need something to actually consume the messages and actually call our handlers at some point. So that's the main kind of like concepts in Symfony Messenger. The same thing in sort of like a diagram. So that's here, that's a blue background. But basically you've got your messages that dispatches to the message bus that are handled by the message handlers. Instead of directly calling the message handler, what the message bus can do is to route the messages via some transports, and the worker receives the messages from the transports and dispatch them to the bus that calls the message handler. And the transports are actually talking to your thing. So here you've got like Kafka, you've got RabbitMq, Google PubSub, and Amazon SQS, I guess. So that's the main idea of the component. That's me. So that's when you actually want to get started. What we are going to do is to just like have a simple Symfony application and trying to go through creating a message, sending a message, handling it, and then putting like some transport in that thing. So a message, as I said, there is no specific requirement at all. It's just your PHP class. So whoever is like interested in kind of the CQRS perspective, that can be a command, can be a query, that can be an event. In here, it's kind of a command, so we want to actually say, send a notification. Send a given message here to a set of users. So that's your message. If you want to get started with the Symfony Messenger component, you can use composer, require Symfony/messenger, and that's going to download your component. If you're not in a Symfony application, or not in a standard Symfony application, you just want to use the component, that's made for that. So you can completely do that. And the main thing here is that you create your message bus. And a message bus is actually a set of middlewares. So the idea is every middleware like kind of adds some logic within the bus. In this example, the simplest message bus you can actually do is one middleware, and the responsibility of this middleware is to actually call the message handlers. And you are going to say that the send notification objects or messages are going to be called by this handler. And in Symfony Messenger, an handler is just a PHP callable. So if you just use the component, that can be a very simple anonymous function. We'll see like another example where it can also like just be a PHP class or something like that. But that's the main idea of the component when you just use it as a component. The rest of the example are going to be in a Symfony application. And when you're in a Symfony application, you actually don't need to do anything. That's just when the component is quite here, it's going to be automatically enabled on your application. So that's a Symfony controller that contains one action. So that's Symfony 3.4 plus, if I remember correctly, where we can actually inject the bus directly in the actions argument. So what's very important in here is just these 3 lines. So you just inject your message bus interface, you just inject your bus, and you dispatch your own message. That's the main entry point to the actual message bus on the messenger component. That's kind of it. The rest is just like, I'm gonna just return an OK response on the page. So if we run that thing, we're going to have this amazing page, which is quite interesting. It's just an error message, or an error page, just saying, well, we don't have any handler for the message send notification, because we just created the message and dispatched it. So the next obvious step is create an handler for this message. So an handler, as I said, is a PHP callable. In PHP, we've got this magic __ invoke method on objects that transforms them like as a callable. So that's how a handler looks like. Again, there is no specific required interface or something like that. That's just a callable. In here, where we just have a type-in that says that's the message I want to receive, send notification, and that's your business logic. It's a very complex one. Here, I just display something. So that's basically just what an handler is about. Once we've created it, we need to register it and plug in it into the Symfony applications. So there's 2 ways. The first one being like kind of like the normal way, as in creating a service and adding a tag, which is the messenger.message handler tag. Symfony is gonna just look at the type int and know that this handler wants to do some stuff for the send notification message. There's another way, which is, in my point of view, much better, or at least more interesting. It's just the PSR for discovery. So if you actually want to, you can say that every class, so that's not specific to Messenger, by the way, but you can say that every class within your message handler folder, for example, is going to have the message handler class tag. There's other kind of ways where you actually have an interface that you can type in, and that's going to be auto-configured as well. Once you actually register your handler, if we reload the page, what should happen is here, yeah, 2 notification has been sent. That's what we've put in our controller, and OK. And you've got this beautiful like profiler bar that actually displays to you like, the number of messages that went through the bus, etc., etc. So that's it. That's basically the messenger component as in a message bus perspective. So now if we actually just use this simple example and we kind of like go ahead and we say your application, oh yeah, I forgot this slide, that's the same thing. That's what we've done in the kind of like in a graph way. So we imagine that your application now is extremely successful and you actually have like thousands of users and we send notification, and now it takes ages. Because we actually have like the notification to send like to 100 users, and that doesn't really work well. As in, that works. So that's another example where actually it takes a lot of time to send a notification. It's gonna work as well, but if you see in this example, that takes like roughly like a minute to do that. So in these kind of use cases, what usually we actually need to do is to start optimizing it maybe, but also like trying to do some asynchronous processing. So we can say to the user actually, all right, I'm gonna send the notifications at some point, maybe in like a few milliseconds, maybe in 2 minutes, I don't know. So that's the idea of postponing some work via some asynchronous processing. But you've got 2 options, obviously. The first one is to keep that, that's fine. And that's your users. There's a lot of famous applications that work this way. That's okay. But the other one is really like go and put everything within the loop and asynchronizing all the things. So in order to do that, we're gonna use the message bus, again, not to directly call the handlers, but to route, and that's the term we're gonna use, to route the messages via some transport. So that's kind of the next part that we're gonna explore. So first, very good question, what is transport? So there are like 2 important things in the transport. First one is a sender. So it has the capability to actually send a message somewhere. And it also has the capabilities to receive a message somewhere. So we kind of split in 2 different concepts, just because potentially some transport might not be able to receive and some not send, something like that. A transport is also something that is, we made it generic in the way that it is configurable via DSN. So the idea is you don't have any specific configuration necessarily in your Symfony configuration, let's say. It's like the database, for example, when you've got now the configuration of Doctrine is database DSN, or sort of like a URL, where you actually put in the protocol, you put like whatever PostgreSQL, MySQL, whatever you use. That's going to be the same idea. That is the same idea. So you can say it's AMQP, it's like Google something that's going to just be able to be configured via an environment variable. That's the main point. And the last thing, which is quite interesting, there is this notion of encoders and decoders, because obviously your messages, because they go through like some sort of message broker, they need to actually be serialized and deserialized. So by default, we just use the Symfony serializer. You can replace with whatever you want. I wouldn't recommend that, but you can. So how it looks like in a Symfony application, again, it's just if you want not to use Symfony, just the component, that's just a set of class to create. That works. So the first step being to configure a transport. In order to configure a transport, you give it the name and you give it the DSN. In that example, I used the example that we are going to put in the recipe. Modulo may be the name that might change. So we actually say that the DSN for the default transport is going to use MQP. It's going to use the server that is like on the local host, using user guest, password guest, and using the queue and exchanges that's called messages. That's it. So that's the idea of the configuration via DSN. Once you've configured your transport, the next thing is to actually say to the message bus, hey, route my message to the transport. And that's at the same place, roughly. It's in Framework Messenger routing, and you actually say, this message, route it to the transport that is called default. And that's it. That's all you need to do. And now, if we really run the application, that's amazing. It's like 200 milliseconds, super, super fast. But the problem might be that actually nothing happened, right? Right now. So if nothing happened, then we actually need to use this last thing, which is the worker, to actually get the messages via the transport and send them back to the bus, and then they're going to be called by the handlers. So that's where we have a command for you. That is a messenger consume messages command, and all that this thing is going to do is to ask your transport to receive some messages and send that back to the message bus. That's going to be called. Is going to call your handler. So if we actually run that thing on our example, we are going to have all the like beautiful echoes that we actually had before on the web, just in here in our command. So that's a long-running process. So you just need to run it once. Obviously, ideally, you put like some supervisor or something to make sure it's always up and stuff like that. But you just run it once, and it listens to all the messages. That's your worker. And now we're done. So that's kind of like the I've got a very small amount of time. So, but that's kind of the idea of like message buses and sending the messages through some transport for you. A few things I'm gonna add is that obviously for people that are interested into CQRS and trying to think about different buses, whatever you want to put in buses. For example, there's this notion where common buses or even buses have different like kind of like logic or different way of behaving. Typically, like do not return some result or these kind of things. You can directly within the Symfony configuration create multiple buses. So here you create 2 of them, and you can also register your own middlewares as well. So middlewares, I kind of like spoke about it a little bit. So that's something that is executed every time the message is dispatched to the bus. That's something that helps you to add some capabilities to the message bus. Typically, that can be like validate that whoever is sending the message has all the security or the permissions to do that. These kind of things. Wrapping it into a doctrine transaction or this kind of stuff. So the last really kind of like a tricky aspect I'm gonna touch very, very, very fast is these envelopes. So all you've seen so far is just like messages, that's your own thing, there's nothing fancy, everything, all the complexity is actually hidden from you. There's this thing where sometimes we actually want to add some kind of like context around the messages. So we took this beautiful name, which is an envelope where you actually put your messages, and you like usually you put some stamps. Here they're called items. So you can also dispatch a message within an envelope with some items. In this example, you've got a serializer configuration item. So it means that when the message is going to be serialized by the transport, it will use the Symfony serializer groups, my serialization groups. There is the same one for the validation as well. If you want to have some validation groups when the message goes to the bus and is validated by the Symfony validator component. Obviously, you can create your own. And that's where I kind of show you what a middleware is about. That's something like that. So middleware is just something that is gonna take the message and call the next middleware until the one that is going to be called is the one that actually calls the handler. That's kind of the chain within the message bus. In here, what you can actually see is that if you've got this very special envelope-aware interface on the middleware, instead of just getting the message, you can also get the envelope directly. So then you can get like some your item, your configuration, so get some configuration that you've put when dispatching the message. And you can also like enhance the message via adding your own items on the envelope. All this complexity is you may not have to touch it. So if you don't put this envelope-aware interface, your middleware is just gonna have the message, and you don't have to care about that sort of like transport layer. So transport, again, quickly, we've got a built-in MQP transport, so you don't have to install anything else. That's it. That's here. You need to have the MQP PHP extension, but that's usually not a big deal. In the MQP1, the disclaimer is that's still pull request, but very, very, very likely to be in the 4.1. We've got a very nice retry mechanism, where if something fails, it's gonna wait X seconds, then it fails again, it's gonna wait Y seconds and this kind of stuff, and you can configure it. That's fine. Thank you. Cheers. So there is much more in the transport. There is especially something that's called ASYNCHRONOUS that is quite known because it supports a lot of transports, especially like all the cloud-based solutions. So we have a transport that uses ASYNCHRONOUS, so you can basically use like all these, like I think it's 10 or 12 specific cloud provider-based message broker that they use, so Kafka and Cloud PubSub and these kind of things. So you can just use it using the messenger adapter in the phpMq organization. So check this link, and you can do that. So just to kind of finish, what you can do, first thing is you can try it. So 4.1 is obviously going to be released at the end of the month. We've got the beta one already released. We've got, I don't know, something like 3 weeks before we finish the 4.1. So just give a try. There's sometimes to potentially like change a bit of things or fix some bugs before we actually do the stable release. So please have a look and try it. Give us some feedback, just to say, okay, right, I kind of need that in my specific use case or something like that. Give us some feedback and we can adjust. Obviously, even better, if you want to like send a pull request to fix some bugs, go on. And the last thing is enjoy. The entire point of that component is to help us to, or at least reduce the pain that we as developer usually have when we kind of like need to implement asynchronous processing, which is like more and more like the case most of the time. So thank you very much for that one, and I hope you'll enjoy.